The Conquest of Malacca, Part 02/02. First strike. Albuquerque divided his troops into two groups. A larger one, under his personal command, and a smaller one, under the command of Dom João de Lima. Disembarkation began at 2 a.m. While the Portuguese fleet bombarded enemy land positions, the infantry rowed the boats to the beaches on either side of the bridge in the middle of the city. They were immediately targeted by Malay artillery along the beach, but this proved to be ineffective. Albuquerque landed west of the bridge, in the part of the city known as Yupa, while Dom João de Lima landed on the east side, Ilir, where the Sultan's palace and a mosque were located. Once on land, the Portuguese launched the pavises of the barges in the sand to walk over the thistles and gunpowder mines. Protected by steel helmets and breastplates, the nobles in full armor were at the forefront of the advance. Thus, the Portuguese took the Malay defensive positions by storm, destroying any resistance. After crossing the roadblocks, Albuquerque's squadron forced the Malays to retreat to the main street and proceeded towards the bridge, where they faced fierce resistance and an attack from the rear. To the east, Dom João's squadron faced a counterattack by the Corps of War Elephants, commanded by the Sultan himself, his son Aladdin, and his son-in-law, the Sultan of Pau. There was a brief moment of hesitation. After all, elephants must be frightening, or analysis of an unexpected situation, because after a short period, the Portuguese nobles attacked the elephant corps, but followed straight to the royal elephant, with the spears, taking it or to flee in panic, scattering the other elephants and throwing the troops that followed them into disarray. In this blow, the Sultan fell from his elephant, wounded, but managed to escape through the confusion. In the middle of the day, the two Portuguese groups surrounded the bridge, and the defenders jumped into the river, being intercepted by the Portuguese barge crews. Having taken the bridge, the Portuguese raised tarpaulins to rest, protected from the intense sun. However, Albuquerque decided to call off the attack when he realized that supplies were running low, and ordered the troops to re-embark, but they set fire to the royal palace and the mosque before leaving. To prevent the Malays from resuming positions on the bridge, the next day the Portuguese armed a tall junk with artillery, which included fast-firing retroload cannons and very long spears to prevent it from being rammed by incendiary rafts, and towed it to the side of the bridge. At the mouth of the river, it ran aground and was immediately fired upon by the Malays' firearms. The captain, Antonio de Abreu, was shot in the face, but survived and refused to relinquish his post, declaring that he would command the ship from his bed if necessary. Second attack. On August 8, the governor met with his captains in council and invoked the need to take the city in order to interrupt the very rich flow of spices to Cairo and Mecca via Calicut and to prevent Islam from establishing itself there. For this attack, Albuquerque disembarked all his troops, divided into three groups, on the western side of Malacca, UPE, supported by a small caravel, a galley and landing barges armed with cannons. Once the junk was dislodged by the rising tide in the morning, drawing fire from the defenders as it sailed towards the bridge, the landing began as the armada shelled the town. Landed ashore, the Portuguese quickly overcame the Malay defenses and recaptured the bridge, devoid of defenders. On both sides the Portuguese erected barricades made of barrels filled with earth, and placed artillery on them. From the east side, a squadron set out to attack the mosque and after a prolonged fight again routed the defenders. The bridge having been fortified and the troops provisioned, Albuquerque ordered several nobles, at the head of a few squadrons, to run through the streets and neutralize the Malay snipers on the roofs. In doing so, they overthrew those who resisted them, and many civilians also died in the attack. Seeing the Sultan's forces falter, Albuquerque decided to take full control of the city. With 400 men in ranks 6 men wide, he advanced through the streets, to the sound of drums and trumpets, eliminating any pockets of resistance. According to Gaspar Correa, the Malays were very frightened by the heavy spears or pikes of the Portuguese, in European fashion, which they had never seen before. The cleaning operation took 8 days. Unable to oppose the Portuguese any longer, the Sultan gathered his royal treasure and what was left of his forces and finally retreated into the jungle. The loot. Having conquered the city, Albuquerque organized the looting in the most controlled way possible. For 3 days, from morning to dusk, several groups gathered on the beach had limited time to run around the city and return with whatever they could bring with them. They were strictly forbidden to loot the properties of Chinese, Hindus and Peruanos, who supported the Portuguese and received flags to mark their homes. Most of the population emerged unscathed. The booty was rich: more than 200,000 crusaders, 3,000 bronze and iron bombards and several slaves reverted to the crown. According to Correa, the rank-and-file soldiers received more than 4,000 cruzados each, while the captains received up to 30,000. At the time, 1,000 cruzados was roughly equivalent to the annual income of an earl in Portugal. Albuquerque recovered from the expedition a jewel-encrusted bench, 4 gold lions and even a gold bracelet that was said to have the magical property of preventing the wearer from bleeding. Correa estimated that 2/3 of the city's wealth was left over. Aftermath and consequences. The operation cost the Portuguese 28 dead and many wounded. Sultan Mammoth's artillery pieces and firearms were ineffective despite their impressive numbers. Most Portuguese casualties were due to poison arrows. The Sultan was deposed, but not vanquished. He withdrew a few kilometers to the south of Malacca, and set up camp near the mouth of the Moor River, where his fleet was, and there he waited for the Portuguese to sack the city and abandon it. But Albuquerque did not only intend to sack the city, but to occupy it permanently. To this end, he ordered the construction of a fortress by the coast, which became known as a Formosa, due to its unusually tall keep, over 18 meters high. The stone was brought by sea, as there was no way to reach the city. Albuquerque had a large stone engraved with the names of the main participants in the conquest. As a great discussion arose about the order in which they should appear and, in a hurry to finish the work soon so he could continue with his other projects in India, Albuquerque, irritated, then ordered them to sit facing the wall, with only the inscription Lapidem quem reprobaver and uplifting. The stone which the builders rejected in Latin. Administration and diplomacy. He promised the inhabitants that they could go about their business as before. Nina Chatu was appointed as a representative of the Hindu or non-Muslim community. In addition to assisting in the governance of the city and coinage, this also provided the junks where they followed various diplomatic missions. The Javanese, Malay and Luciani communities were also entitled to their own magistrates, although the Javanese representative, Udamura Raja, was executed and replaced shortly afterwards for conspiring with the exiled Sultan. The trial of Udamura Raja, an important Malaccan nobleman, was the first act of justice that the Portuguese carried out in Malacca, according to Roman law, which earned Albuquerque and the Portuguese a reputation as fairness among local residents. It was that justice that was the first to pass our laws and ordinances, and processed according to the form of law that was made in that city. As a result, the people of Malacca became very dismayed by that tyrant, and we became people of great justice. A new coin was minted with the support of Nina Chatu and a parade organized through the streets of the city, in which the new coins were thrown from silver bowls to the population from the top of 11 elephants. 2 heralds proclaimed the new laws, one in Portuguese and the other in Malay, followed by Portuguese troops, playing trumpets and drums, to the great astonishment of the locals, as Gaspar Correa says. Diplomatic missions were sent to Pegu and Siam to sign alliance treaties, as well as to supply vital foodstuffs, such as rice, to replace the Javanese, hostile to the Portuguese. Albuquerque had already sent an emissary, Duarte Fernandez, to Siam in July. While the assault on the city was still underway, an exchange of diplomats secured the firm support of the King of Siam, who despised Sultan Mammoth. The Kingdom of Pegu also confirmed its support for the Portuguese, and in 1513 junks from Pegu arrived to trade in Malacca. While in the city, Albuquerque received envoys and ambassadors from many Malay and Indonesian kingdoms, including Sultan Mahmud's son-in-law, the Sultan of Pau, with gifts dedicated to the King of Portugal. When Albuquerque announced that he would leave for Goa, the inhabitants begged him not to, but, the governor having left Malacca in January 1512, they mourned. However, Frol del Mar pointed out the fate that other ships would follow for centuries, even though it was an icon, a ship that led the Battle of Dio, leading Portugal to its glory. It left so full of cargo that in the first storm it faced, still in Sumatra, it sank, taking with it much more than the treasures of stones and gold but the loss of documents, an official letter from the King of Siam and the spoils and gifts destined for Dom Manuel, with the exception of a large ruby, a richly decorated sword and a golden chalice sent by the King of Siam, which the crew managed to rescue. Chinese retaliation against Portugal. Malacca was a tributary state and ally of the Ming dynasty in China. When the Sultan of Malacca sent a message to the Emperor of China asking for help against the Portuguese, the Chinese ordered Siam, then known as the Kingdom of Ayutthaya or Thailand, and other neighbors of Malacca to come to Malacca's aid and fight the Portuguese. In addition to the Chinese demanding that the Portuguese leave Malacca, the Portuguese obviously ignored and the Thais refused to carry out the Chinese order, leaving Malacca without help. The Chinese then blamed the Thais and other neighbors for the fall of Malacca. The Portuguese feared a Chinese invasion after capturing the city and did not send any diplomatic missions to China immediately after the capture, waiting until 1516. Meanwhile, the exiled Sultan of Malacca sent more messages to China of all sorts, and when the Portuguese mission arrived in China, the Chinese acted against the Portuguese. After Pires arrived in Beijing in 1520, the Chinese decided to arrest the embassy. The deposed Sultan of Malacca Mahmud Shah sent another message to China, and this time China responded by executing the Portuguese diplomatic embassy. The Chinese imperial government arrested and executed several Portuguese diplomatic envoys after torturing them in Guangzhou. The Moluccans told the Chinese that the Portuguese disguised their plans to conquer territory as mere commercial activities, and told of all the hardships they had experienced at the hands of the Portuguese. Due to the Sultan of Malacca incessantly presenting complaints against the Portuguese invasion to the Chinese emperor, and fomenting and spreading a chain of counter-information, thus fomenting the ears of the Chinese emperor and disrupting Portugal's plans, or at least delaying them. The Portuguese were received with great hostility by the Chinese when they arrived in China. But the Portuguese are persistent and insisted, and under the Chinese hostilities Portuguese banditry acts began. Violent activities in China led the Chinese authorities to execute more Portuguese and torture the rest in prisons. But the merchants were not linked to the emperor, and with that Portugal was established and trading posts began to be established with the Chinese without the emperor's consent. Portugal responded to the murders of Portuguese with piracy activities and attacks in China. The Chinese responded with the total extermination of the Portuguese. This took time to appease the emperor's heart, and when that happened, Portugal was already established. But that's another story full of martyrs. dedication and determination, a determination I've never seen. I only find it in the readings of the histories of these accomplishments of such a short period and so little told.
The discovery of Portugal, the untold stories of our ancestors.